Well, congratulations, you just realized this video is around 15 minutes long. But before you click off, the video is broken down into 4 or so sections, so feel free to pause the video, take a break, and come back whenever you please. Speaking of which, please watch the whole thing, this video took way too long to make. Have you ever seen those colorful towns in Italy in the south of France? Perhaps you saw it in a Pixar movie or an action movie in which they caused thousands of dollars of property damages to rain on people's roofs. Maybe you have, but how many of these towns have you seen in Minecraft? As of April or so last year, I decided to add to the few of these towns I've seen and build my own. The houses look simple, how hard could it be? If you've known my channel before this video, you might be wondering, what the hell took me so long to make it? The last video was in January, what were you doing? To make it short, I recorded all the music in the video myself. I'd be using a lot of guitar for it, and I just happen to play guitar, so what if Oh, big mistake. So anyway, out of the year of making this Minecraft video, I spent half that year not playing Minecraft, recording music. Brilliant. After a month of learning Roll Painter from the tutorials of Lord Dagger, I had a map I liked and a city planned out on it. And the first house sucked. Without hesitation, I quit to go mess around with World Painter again, resulting in an even bigger map. This has some cliffs in the southeast, plains and beaches in the west, rivers and forests in the midwest, and some not very good mountains in the north. Since I refused to give up on the Mediterranean town, I planned the terrain in the southeast for it. And that's what we'll be building on, so let's hop to it, yeah? To start off, I had absolutely no idea where to build, so I completely avoided the question and built some houses in the sky. Of course, they were still difficult at first, but I soon realized the buildings didn't need to be detailed, they just needed to be covered in leaf blocks. If you ever find yourself looking at an ugly blank wall, all you have to do is put some vines of leaf blocks over it and it'll look good. Looking at my references, such as this town, and again, I saw that the main house colors were mostly a pastel red, yellow, orange, pink, and white. Once I finished the basic colors and covered them all in leaves, I expanded the army of houses. Many of the buildings in my references had cyan shutters, so I started using warped trapdoors instead of spruce on some variants. And pretty much all the towns I looked at, rooftop balconies were very common, so I carved some out on a new row of houses. I pasted in another row that used dark oak, which also looked okay for balconies, because I felt like I needed more variety, and obviously to give me more interiors to do. I wasn't too happy with these next shorter buildings, especially since there was no practical way to get to the top from the interior. Finally, I wanted to make some more complex houses. For references, I really only used the World Tanks test map Aquila and my plain imagination. I really wanted this fancy archway and staircase up the side of a house, so I made sure to include it in the first one I made. I decided orange also fits this building, so I copied it over and covered it with leaves. The next one is a simple rectangle with a bunch of windows all around and a rather flat roof. I saw them in a lot of my references, so I made sure to have it in another color as well for variety. Since I had some troubles with a red building to start out with, I had another go at it and made something like a cafe, using sandstone accents and leaves to detail it more. After a few quick fails, the next one took shape as a rather flat building with some arches in the front. I decided to try the white terracotta again and made an L-shaped house with a taller section in the corner. You'll see as I paste some red and yellow variants in, these houses also have a staircase up the side to an upper level. So after I leaf up these two, I make another smaller house with a low section on one side and a bit of a tower on the other. I saw quite a few of these in my references, so I decided to also put it in white. For my last type, I saw that I had been lacking balconies, so I gave this one a large rooftop area on the back and a wraparound porch around one of the corners. Finally, I went back and edited the short houses to give them a proper roof instead of a balcony. Unfortunately, it was time to face the question of where to start. Because this town would have a busy port, it seemed right to start making a long wharf. First I planned out the edge, then filled it in with commands. Now this by itself would be ugly as hell, so I added pillars along the edge to give it some depth, and to give me somewhere convenient to add railings. Originally, the new at the time mud bricks seemed to match the colors of the Mediterranean wharfs and cobbled streets best, but they seemed to, ironically, muddy up the details to the point that they were barely visible. Seeing this, I tried out 2 other palettes and asked some friends which they preferred. After completely ignoring their opinions, I settled with a tried and true stone palette and continued building the wharf. Since motivation to finish the wharf was about as low as it is now doing these hoist lines, forcing myself to finish the wharf took 2 weeks. This stuff was so damn boring I couldn't do it for over an hour. I considered covering this indent in the wharf over with a wooden platform, but instead decided to turn to a dreadnought for smaller merchant ships. In a future video, I'll come back and finish it. With the wharf's edge done, I placed down some house footprints so I could plan out the wall to the city's upper level. Because this is going to be a large fort, it felt right to start off with a warehouse. For its name, I settled on the Whale's Belly, probably because it's the largest warehouse we're going to build. I used calcite and stripped dark oak logs for the majority of it. I built some warehouses leading down to the coast that will become the east side. Smaller merchants or companies can rent these while they're in town to load into, before selling their goods at the markets. Continuing my building spree of warehouses, because what else would you even put in a bustling port, I tried to build another angled warehouse like the Whale's Belly. However, when I reached the roof, I couldn't figure it out, big surprise, and deleted it. Back to having no ideas, I referenced Lord Dacre's 31st Bataria video and built a similar but smaller crane to help unload ships of larger crates. I extended the wall out a little more before building a couple wooden docks supported by spruce log pilings. Finally, I decided to build something other than warehouses and docks. While I built up most of the structure with calcite and dark oak again, I left a large stone foundation. This building actually has a bell tower in it, giving it its name as the Bell Tower Tavern. So of course, sailors are going to need somewhere to eat or drink after a long voyage at sea. Perhaps it's a quick trading or resupply stop and they don't want to go all the way into the sea to find food. The tavern also has a bunch of rooms sailors can rent out for a quick night on a solid, unshifting structure. So you see, I built up the tower and put the bell at the top. Now at the base, it's a bit empty, so I figured a fountain would work there. After a couple designs, I carved out a small dolphin and put it into place, forming Dolphin Square. Between the tavern and the warehouse, there's going to be a blacksmith. I tried on diagonal at first, but of course the roof got me again. I'm using mud blocks for the walls, which were new at the time, or at least for me they were. In the back, I put in a forge, anvil, and bellow. The tavern and blacksmith separate the northern peninsula district of North Point from the rest of the city. So the first building on North Point is the Smith & Watson Cooperage. I planned it out using yellow concrete and terracotta to try to brighten up the place and match it with the houses we built earlier, but it looked awful. So once again, spruce it is! Inside we have the normal interior stuff like a table and a kitchen area. Under the balcony, I built a workspace for the carpenter as I completely forgot what the building was. Quickly, I replaced it with the workstation of a cooper and put some barrels up for sale on the inside. Now on to the actual carpentry. Since carpentry was such a giant and broad industry for most of the 2,000 years of European history I actually studied, I wanted to give it a large building to show its importance. I tried to make it connect to a gate that opened to a small market for fishermen to sell and buy their fish and buy equipment like nets. For some reason, I couldn't get something in the gate to line up, so I had to scrap the idea. I still wanted it to be important, so I incorporated the tower as a sign of wealth or importance. Upstairs, there's the normal kitchen stuff like a table and barrels for cabinets, and downstairs, the carpenters have an open workplace with hammers, nails, and saws. This next small building is the Smoking Fish, which buys fish from fishermen and resells them once they've been cooked. On the right side of the smokehouse, there's a giant smoker with fish hanging down. Once again, I used my fence and lightning rod technique to represent the fish. In front of the smoky gray windows, I put a rack covered in fish, utilizing unlit campfires. Back by the whale's belly, I wanted to fill in more space, so I built a cartwright. A cartwright makes wagons, or carts, and since this is a busy port with lots of goods to be moved about and distributed, it would be a much needed industry. I replaced the back of the building with an awning that partially covers a large fenced-in area for building and storing wagons. Inside there's a desk and waiting area, and upstairs contains the normal living quarters. Someone suggested to me that I should add some greenery to North Point, so I obliged by adding one singular tree. For a while, I've been wanting to use the copper blocks for a gradient, so I decided it was finally time to use them. What I had built didn't look too great, having brick roof and polished granite walls. What are you thinking? So when I came to this part in the script, I successfully procrastinated writing the script by adding this shop. Anyway, this is the fish shop, where fishermen can sell odd stuff they fished up. I added more strange stuff, so it didn't basically just sell coral like it did before. By now I'm scrambling to find good blocks to make this city look good, but also varied. So with gray concrete powder for the foundation and actually scratched out about variety, we're doing calcite again. After a 2-week vacation and no motivation upon returning, I tried a round roof with no success and just went with a normal A-frame. Moving to the back, I decided to add some large windows that overlook the bay. So this is actually the first shop in the textile industry. Being very creative, I called it the spinning wheel. There are lots of fabrics needed in Pascila, clothing, sails, and carpets being the main ones. The spinning wheel focuses on clothing, but it also spins the fabrics for all the other shops in the industry except for the next one. The opposite side of the shop is the residential quarters, with bedrooms and living space. Outside, I placed a couple wagons from the cartwright before moving on to the next business. This one possesses the very imaginative name, North Point Fabrics. However, I did choose some interesting blocks, including pistons and waxed weather cut copper. Now before you go placing your levers and redstone torches everywhere, pistons work fine as building blocks. Inside, I opted for oak floors and planned out the layout of the shop. When building the dining room, I found out that making furniture on slab floors is completely and utterly awful. Unlike the rest of the textile industry, North Point Fabric spins its own textiles instead of buying it from the spinning wheel. Since Pascila can't just have one clothing store for the entire city, this shop also sells clothes, but also makes banners, flags, and curtains. At the end of the street, I wanted something large and imposing, so after picking through a few blocks, I planned out part of the next building using my handy masking blocks, pink and red wool. After building up the walls and roof, I constructed another shop using oak and dark oak, basically on top of the first one. It looks a little wacky, but it definitely looks imposing from the street view. The bottom shop is William & Williams Sails. Doing minimal research, I found that sails are made from strips of cloth sewed together, or something. So I just put a couple strips of white wool and sticks and invisible item frames for stitches. Very accurate and detailed, I know. The top shop is called Tropical Sails, and it is represented, of course, by clownfish. For some reason, I had it in my mind that Tropical Sails and the Williams were bitter competitors in the sail business. Sails are essential to most of Pascila's economy, which revolves mostly around fishing and trading. Consequently, sail making is a lucrative business. So, despite living in pretty much the same building, the Williams and the Tropics are tycoon rivals. Back outside, I decided it was time for the center of the textile industry in North Point, the fountain in the Windy Sails Plaza. The centerpiece isn't exactly the most accurate ship, but I may update in the future. Completing the square is the weaving fish. It's another white and dark oak shop, but I used diorite instead of calcite for once. The weaving fish doesn't make clothes or sails, instead it focuses on carpets. There are loads of carpets in Pascila, so it makes sense to have a shop for it. In the thin part of the L, I built a large loom for the long carpets and set some carpets in the main shop area. Finally, out of the fabric industry, I built a dock for all the small fishing boats and placed about a lot of chests, barrels, nets, and even mangrove roots as crab traps. Back by the weaving fish, I planned out the height for another very important building, the clock tower. The clock is visible from most of North Point, so fishermen and merchants can be on time anywhere they are in the district. At the base of the tower is another tavern. For the tavern, I used oak, mangrove, and spruce woods. Mangrove logs are probably my favorite logs now because of how well they work with all the spruce blocks. After a couple of tries, I found a good shape with an overhang out front that provides cover for sailors on a rainy day. Inside, I chose birch floors for most of the tavern, but a classic checker floor in the kitchen before placing tables and chairs about. Every room upstairs in the tavern includes a clock to keep you on time. At least it's not a giant bell that wakes you up like in the Bell Tower Tavern. Since I changed the smoking fish to jungle planks, I still wanted to make a shop using mangrove planks. So far, I'd been unsuccessful in doing so, but I finally found a palette that worked well. It's also quite fitting for the crab traps business of making and selling crab traps. Mangrove roots and debugged iron bars work great for crab traps. If you're in creative, you might also be able to put armor stands with something red in their head slot to put a crab inside of them too. Finally, for the last shop in the district of North Point, I used waxed oxidized copper and polished deep slate. Clearly, I was struggling with imaginative blocks at the end. Anyway, this is the Jellyfish's Nettles. Fishermen love this shop for its quality fishing nets and reasonable prices. If a fisher needs a new net, they can quickly go to Jellyfish and purchase a new net rather than going all the way into the city to the other stores. Outside the jellyfish and crab trap is the market that I had long since planned to be behind the carpentry. Some fishermen like to sell their fish directly to city folk instead of to the Smoking Fish or other restaurants, so they set up a stall in this market. Others sell coral or other odd things that normally go to the fish shop. Speaking of the fish shop, there's an open area between it and the Bell Tower Tavern that was an even number of blocks. Despite my love for odd numbers in Minecraft, I was able to make a decent looking park with more azalea trees and bushes. I finally decided to place a few of the houses I made at the beginning of the video onto the street, but quickly realized I needed more colors and variations. To remedy this for the future, I copied the houses we already had and changed their colors. I then spent a few painful hours making 20 more unique interiors for these ones. Back to the ground, I started work on the district of Eastside, which is just south of North Point. As you'll see, Eastside is mostly comprised of storage depots for merchants to store their goods before sailing off or distributing them. With all the boring terraforming and walls done, I experimented with a few interesting blocks on a new warehouse belonging to Theodore and Hemington. Mushroom blocks are quite versatile because they're a poor texture state, which actually means you can have two different wall colors on the same block. In building, that's kinda OP. Behind the Theodore and Hemington warehouse, I built another depot which I aptly named the Bee's Nest since I used beehive blocks for the walls. Bees used to be common near the warehouse, but ever since the tree in front of it died, they haven't been seen much. I pasted in the remaining buildings for Eastside warehouses, and used masks to texture them all uniquely. There was still enough room for another building along the wall, however, the rooms were too small for swing doors to open inward or outward. Because of this, the angler's mouth has doors that can be lifted by a pulley system and chains, which hang down in front of it like an angler's light. Forced by the shape of the wall, I had to make some diagonal warehouses. Fortunately, 45-degree houses with slab roofs are pretty easily done. For the smaller one beside it, I originally used warped planks, then switched to jungle soon after. Because of its shabby appearance, the owners who recently acquired it to fix it up called it Shanty Shack Storage. Another plank I'd been wanting to use with a brick roof was birch. I built a stone foundation for the first floor, which contains the warehouses, and used birch on top of it with spruce and mangrove woods. The reason the dolphin's tail is so attractive is that the upper floors contain rooms for the merchants who rent out the stock rooms. Therefore, they don't need to rent out a room in a tavern and shouldn't feel too vulnerable to thieves. Next to the dolphin's tail, I planned a very large building incorporating diagonal sections into it. Using lime wool, I built the walls and roofs before coloring it in with a coral foundation and my favorite, calcite, for the rest of the floors. Although there are so many warehouses in Eastside, there's actually nowhere to go in order to rent them, except for the angler's mouth. So if a merchant is starting out, he'd most likely wander over to this building and find the office of the stock room he wants to rent. On the other side, I constructed another shop, leaving an isolated space behind it. For this one, I decided not to use anything crazy and settled for oak planks and smokers. I mentioned earlier how important carpentry is, so it's fitting that there's more than one carpentry since this is the most industrious part of the city. Most of the work done by this carpentry is out back, including planks, doors, and even boats. Okay, Swear put boats back there. Just like in North Point, there's a cooperage right next to the carpentry in Eastside. When I built the North Point cooperage, I almost tried to make it look like a barrel with the blocks I used. I tried this again on this one, using deep clay as the hoops of the barrel and blackstone buttons as rivets. Coopers are rather important since they make things from barrels to wooden buckets to cups. Pascila keeps meticulous records on the comings and goings of ships in the harbor. The first stop for captains is the harbor office. Once again, I had to make it on diagonal because of the shape of the wall. The second to last building on east side is another blacksmith. I kept mostly the stone blocks for the blacksmith, using mostly deep slate bricks for the lower floor and andesite for the upper levels. In the back of the shop, I built the blacksmith's forge and placed an anvil with a few other tools useful for smithing. I then set up some items for sale along a counter in the open part of the shop. Beneath the building, I dug out an area for a smelting room with coal and a bucket that can be raised up to the forge room. It With just a tiny bit of room, I managed to fit one last shop in the east side. While there's a cartwright for repairing and renting wagons in North Point, the shop doesn't actually make any carts. To remedy this, the last building on east side is another cartwright who builds wagons and wheelbarrows behind his shop. In the back, he has a variety of these carts ready to be bought and even a small work table inside. Walking along the wharfs, I found that the port felt quite empty, so for the last bit of east side, I added various cargoes around the place and filled in the empty warehouses. I made sure to add more than just barrels and chests and put down melons, pumpkins, logs, dried kelp logs, and even scaffolding. And with the Merchants Plaza done, the districts of East Side and North Point are completed. When I started this part, I had no idea how to build a good ship. Not knowing what I'm doing seems to be a very common trend when I start these sections. Luckily, I knew where to get some references. The shipwreck structure in game seemed like a good one, and I knew of some people who could make some pretty cool boats on Discord. So of course, I reached out to them to get some advice on shipbuilding. While I waited for replies, I continued to work on what I thought was a proper Spanish galleon. As you can tell, it wasn't looking good. Finally, I got some suggestions from the shipbuilders I asked. Because of that advice, you can see me heavily editing the hull over and over again until I just decide to make a new one. I soon learned that ships are made from a bunch of ovals and different axes, though I still wasn't sure on how. However, I tried to listen to the advice of the masters and kept adjusting the hull accordingly. As I did, the one who built my main reference stuck with me through the process. Unfortunately, I was struggling with building the stern, so I moved over to an Eterno server so he could join me and help me out. This is Josh3108, the most skillful shipbuilder I know. He's made over 35 amazing ships, and they just keep getting better. He's made ships in real life, that one popular pirate series with some guy named Jack, and fish people, and more. Just look at how epic these are. In addition to being a master at shipbuilding, Josh has also been a rather good mentor. Back on the ship, he helped me build the stern. I wanted a standard Georgian-era ship with the yellow stripes of the HMS Victory, so we tried for what I would call a very British stern look with rows of windows and a balcony. We then quickly built some cannon towers before I painted the stripes with the awful looking block of yellow terracotta. Don't worry, while doing the rigging, I switched it out to stripped birchwood. Next, we worked on the beakhead at the front of the ship. After we added railings and a few other things, Josh taught me how to make shrouds. However, I got distracted making a figurehead before I finished. I tried a few different things before settling on this little anvil skeleton with a double-bladed axe. At some point, I finished the other ship and fixed it, but I have no idea when I did it because I don't have a replay of it. Anyway, I used the same skeleton man, but gave him a lantern. For its name, I decided on the Watchman. Back to yard ship, Josh showed me how to make sails, and I built them on all the yards on the fore and main masts. At this point, I believe I was sick and my eyes couldn't stand daytime Minecraft, so I set the time to night. So sorry if it's a bit harder to see. After messing with the jib for a moment, I added more mass for a gradient on the sails. Now it so happens that I built the top and top gallant sails wrong. All the sails besides the core sails on the bottom connect to yards beneath them. So after correcting this mistake, I finished the mizzen sails. There's a special sail that runs mostly parallel to the ship on the mizzen mast. I started to make what is called a spanker, However, I wasn't quite ready for that, so Josh hopped on to teach me how to make a lateen sail. Once the triangle sail was done, he taught me how to do the rest of the rigging in between the masts. I finally decided to call it the Triumphant as it sounded very British, and it was my first ship I triumphantly made. Now on to what I called the practice problems, where I tried to do the rigging by myself and get Josh to check my answers. The Watchman was set in port, so its sails would be furled. Neither the Triumphant nor the Watchman are actually very good, so in a later video, I'm going to fix them. Since I had gone through the examples and the practice problems, it was time for the test, in which I tried to build a full ship without help. I built most of the hull on a Discord stream, but Discord streaming doesn't really work well for me, so my stream ran at something like 0.5 FPS with black frames in between. I wanted the ship to be the biggest of them all and extremely imposing, so I got to work on the stern. It was going to be complicated and elaborate, and then I spent 4 hours on it. When I finally finished, it was a mix of a bunch of ship sterns that I've seen. For this ship, I had already settled on a white and black palette like La Liberté, but I needed another block. So I introduced mud bricks on the cannon towers and used them again on the railings and beakhead. After I planned most of the rigging and yards, I added a figurehead on the beakhead, once again trying to make a sword. I used a variety of blocks including a broom stand, before deciding to use an iron frame, birch fence, and a candle. I had already named the ship the Conqueror, so the figurehead displaying a victorious sword fit it well. Continuing on with the ship, I finished the rigging and shrouds before building my first spanker. I placed it on the ship and started building the rest of the sails. I actually did this on stream on YouTube, so if you want to learn how to make sails, check it out, they're great examples. To really make this thing a true picture of intonation, I wanted to add sail extensions or studding sails. For some reason, I also added a fifth sail or a sky sail to all the masts. Now I've always loved sailing ships, but since Josh taught me how to make these ships in Minecraft, I've also learned how to draw them on paper. Originally, I started just to practice rigging, but I continued drawing ships and still do to this day. I've probably drawn too many, especially since this is a thing. Back to the front of the Conqueror, I added 2 chips along the royal and top gallant stays. The last thing to do was to add sheet lines and recolor the ropes and sails. For the main part of Pascila's navy, I'm going to build a few smaller ships. I based this first frigate off the James Arnold, a whaling ship I saw in a picture that my family owns, and referenced a few other frigates. Although this looks like a mini Conqueror, the rigging was different and was a bit of a fun challenge to reference other ships for its rigging. Of course, after the rigging comes the sails. The James Arnold has interesting sails with 2 wide but thin top and top gallant sails. Again, I added a flying and outer jib on the stays out front and connected the sheet lines to the clews. Next, I built a brig. A brig is a small, two-masted ship, smaller than a frigate but larger than a sloop. In Pascila, they patrol and guard the harbors of East Side and North Point. The brig proved problematic, especially the stern, but I eventually figured it out and built the rigging and sails. For merchants, I built a sloop. Sloops are usually a one-masted ship with a large spanker. They are very swift and rather popular in the Caribbean, especially among pirates. The hull shape beneath the cabin proved to be my main problem this time, as it sloped up very gently. After I finished the rigging sails, I realized that the spanker was way too big, so I looked at some two-masted sloops and recreated their rigging, which includes two spankers. Moving along, I decided to make a cog. Cogs are very old ships dating back to medieval times, usually with one mast and a single square sail. The fore and aft castles of a cog are usually very tall to defend against pirates. Older merchants would probably use this ship if they can't afford a sloop yet. For the last set of small ships, I want to make a proper sloop with only one mast. Again, the shape was a bit of a trouble to make, and I couldn't decide on a color palette. But finally, I settled on dark oak and birch, and moved on to the sails and rigging. Scaling things up again, I want to make an East Indiaman. Remember the Whale's Belly? The same company that owns that also owns these ships. Much like the real East and West India trading companies, the monopolistic merchants who became British agents of imperialism, this company also works very closely with the Crown of Pascila. If you have any name suggestions for this company, please let me know in the comments. For the name of this ship, however, I chose a noble title, the Viscountess. I used calcite for the hull beneath the waterline, strip spruce for the hull above the waterline, and deep slate tiles for the aft castle. Originally, I made the sails too wide, so I had to shorten them before making the foresails. With all the sails and rigging colored and the sheet lines in place, the Viscountess is finished. For the last ship, I want to make a very tall stern in a similar shape to the Batavia's. In fact, almost all the large ships in the earlier part of the Age of Sail had extremely tall aft castles. Usually, they were very ornately detailed, especially the Royal and East Indiaman ships, so I tried to get as much detail in without cluttering the stern with sandstone. I started out using warped planks for the aft castle, mangrove wood for the upper part of the hull, and calcite for the lower part. At the bow, I attempted an old-style beakhead, which was generally less curved and longer. I switched the warped planks to moss blocks before starting the rigging and sails for the last time. I chose to name the Baroness to match the Viscountess's name as a noble title. The last things I did was try to fix the Triumphant's and Watchman's beakheads. The Triumphant's was too long, and the poles I took tended to agree with me. The Watchman's just needed a few edits. Finally, I moved back to the single-player world and pasted all the ships in using world-edit schematics. And that's it for this part. At last, I started a section knowing what I was doing. For my plan, I built a tower that would be placed periodically along the walls. I added a few more details on the lower half before moving on to our first wall segment. Since these segments would make up the walls, I made a slab variant for gradual slopes. I then built a series of diagonal sections for the angled parts of the walls. At the waterline, I started to place the walls and watchtowers on the beach. It wasn't long before I came to a sharp corner. However, I had a plan this time. Using pink wool, I mapped out a footprint of a castle which would serve as a gatehouse. Before I could completely shape the castle, however, I had a bit of trouble with my 45-degree wall sections and had to quickly fix them before continuing. And when I say quickly, it took an ungodly amount of time and confusion. Anyway, after building the foundation, I framed a few walls and worked my way around the castle. I said that this little fortress was supposed to be a gatehouse, but I didn't mention what I guarded. It secures one end of the bridge that will connect the mainland to the military island where the shipyard will be across the bay. I'm sure you think this video is long enough already, so let's save that one for later, yeah? Back by the walls, I used a spear brush and red sand to add artificially placed rocks to protect the walls from erosion. Moving along the coast, I smoothed out a small area and covered it with sand before wrapping the wall around a small gulf. The next stretch was rather straight, so I moved quite quickly along it before reaching a small peninsula. Curves were rather tricky with these sections, but I suffered through it and some of them actually looked pretty interesting. At this point, I reached the easternmost part of the coast and decided to build another castle in the walls. Once again, I used pink wool to outline the foundation before I shaped it with commands. Because of its unique location, I decided to make it a bit of a lighthouse with a tower and beacon. Firstly, however, I formed the rest of the castle and constructed roofs over the halls. I created the tower and checked to make sure it was bright at night. After, I decorated the courtyard with planters and bushes. Inside, I built an interesting pattern in one of the hallways and placed murder holes and arrow slits in the gatehouse. In the lower levels, I filled a common room for soldiers and established barracks in another nearby room. Now, if you've seen my video from January, you know that I've made these types of castles before. But what you probably didn't know is that I actually built these wall castles before that one. Anyways, after a long stretch of diagonal walls, a bit of weirdly shaped coast presented itself to me. It had a couple of curves that I painfully built around and a small headland protruding southeast. At the end of the cape, I added a segment of walls and a tower to serve as another lighthouse. Not long after, I reached another peninsula facing south and decided it was a good spot for me to cure my boredom with another wall fort. Because of this, I fabricated the reason that they existed as guardhouses for soldiers who defended against sea raiders. Once again, I delineated a layout with pink wool before framing the foundations and buildings. This time, I incorporated wall segments and a square tower. My process had me complete the smaller parts of the castle with roofs and battlements before moving on to the towers. Once I did, I added a small square tower first, before making another fire beacon on top of the large one. Then, I pasted the roof from the other fortresses onto the round tower and replaced the masks. On the west side, I added a bit more of erosion-preventing rocks before continuing the walls. I came across another small peninsula, but decided against putting walls on it. Without walls, sea raiders could gather for an attack, especially with the defenses being rather short there. However, with walls, the protrusion would be vulnerable to being attacked from both sides, leading to the entire bulwark being breached. Finally, the last stretch of walls followed the beaching cliffs nicely, leading me to the fortress that ended the defenses. As always, I made the framework first before raising the foundations. Once they were established, I constructed the walls of the rooms with light blue walls before filling in the courtyard. Moving seaward, I detailed the base and built battlements along the walls. Then, I created the gatehouse area with its adjacent buildings. I quickly finished a building adjoining the main hall before moving on to the other side to work on the common room and barracks. Lastly, I completed the hall in the same style as the previous castles, and added planters to the courtyard. I really loved making these castles, and the courtyards with their planters were my favorite part. After I changed all the mats to their proper blocks, I deleted the roofs on some of the wall sections. The open top provides better visibility for sentries, although they might get just a little bit more wet on a rainy day. I even found out that I messed up one part of the wall by making it one block too short. Not knowing what to do with it, I added a flagstaff. And that ends this section and the building part of this video. Before I roll the cinematic, I want to shout out Josh for teaching me how to build ships and being a great friend. This probably won't be the last time he's featured on this channel. I'd also like to shout out Zorincian for keeping me motivated throughout making this video. Without him, I don't know if I ever would have finished it. Both Josh and Zorincian are epic builders, so if you want to check them out, I'll put their pages in the description. If I remember. Sorry this video took so long to release. I struggle with finding uncopyrighted music, so I just composed most of it. Although I did kind of let Block take over in the end. The music will be uploaded in separate videos, so you can listen to it again if you want. The next video hopefully won't be this long, for obvious reasons. Anyway, I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy the cinematic. See ya!